Hi, everyone, and happy Thursday. We appreciate everyone joining the discussion today on marketing in the cookieless internet. My name is Karen Cahill, and I'll be your host. Bella Robbins and Scott Lawrence are also joining the conversation today.
Hello.
Scott, are you with us? Just waiting for Scott. Scott, are you on the line? I see we've just sent Scott a message to say whatever's going on, we can't hear him. So if you guys would just be patient for just a second more, see if we can get Scott on the line.
Sorry about that, guys. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you. Welcome.
Sorry, my AirPods, I thought they were connected. They weren't.
That's okay. All right, well, we're all ready and we're ready to get started. So we have Scott and Bella on the line. And as always, I'd like to encourage everyone to submit questions and comments in the Q&A box rather than the chat box. That way, if we can't get to your question during the webinar, we can pull it from the Q&A report afterwards and we'll get back to you. Also, we'll provide an email at the end for any additional questions you may think of.
Response Mind Digital, for those who don't yet know us, is a digital marketing agency based in Atlanta, Georgia. And Scott is going to go into a little more detail later about who we are and what we do.
Yeah, I'm going to do that later. But before that, I thought I'd explain what our name means. So I think the word digital probably is pretty obvious, but some have told us they don't really understand what response mind means. So the word response refers to the fact that we're a digital response marketing agency. We're also all about getting people to respond to our marketing because marketing should be all about making sales. And so we say that we're mining for responses or riches. And we take that part of it kind of seriously. Our offices are actually decorated with pickaxes and lanterns, and we all refer to each other as miners, actually.
That's right. And today, I believe that people are tuning in because how best to make sales online is really being put to the test. We know that digital marketing is arguably the best it's ever been with incredibly precise targeting because companies like Facebook know a lot about what individual consumers like and what they buy and even what they're in the market to buy. And as of the release of iOS 14.5 a few weeks ago, some of that's likely to change. So let's look at today's agenda to see how we're going to cover this. We don't always start our webinars like this one, but to discuss what a cookieless internet might look like, we've decided it's important to start with the basics so that we're all on the same page at the outset. So we'll talk about what cookies are and how they work. And of course, we'll also get into the difference between first-party and third-party cookies.
Yeah, and that's important because cookies enable tracking, like I'm sure most people realize. And so that segment will lead pretty naturally to talk about how big tech plans to get around, losing all that valuable data that they've been collecting on consumers for many years, and why the GDPR and other regulations in other areas were passed to enhance privacy.
Then we'll talk about how competition is arguably doing a better job than the legislature of getting companies to take privacy seriously.
More specifically, we'll get into how Apple and some others now are taking advantage of a new privacy trend to grow their market share, which is a smart move.
And that will naturally lead into what is really going on at Apple, Google, Facebook, and big tech in general. And then we'll offer some of the solutions we'd suggest that marketers consider for making the best of this not too distant third-party cookieless world.
Yeah, before we do that, and this is what Bella meant earlier, we're going to have a 90-second commercial about who we are at RMI and what we do. I'll tell everybody about a promotion that we have for webinar attendees.
And we like to ask what we call fun trivia questions during our webinars. These are completely anonymous questions where we test the audience's knowledge. We'll drop a question onto the screen and ask you to tell us what you think the answer is. Again, these are completely anonymous and it's meant to be fun. So please be good sports and play along when you see the trivia question pop up onto your screen.
And the last thing about the agenda, we actually had such positive reviews from adding a new feature in the last couple of webinars, and Scott really loves the animation. So now it's a standard practice to build the agenda at the bottom of every slide, and we'll do that again here. That way, as we make our way through the webinar, everyone can follow along and see where we are.
Yeah, so it's also a little easier for people who join a little late. That's part of the reason we added it. Not everybody's on the first 2 minutes of the webinar. So you'll know where we are as we go through it and what's coming up next. So those will be highlighted at the bottom of the page as we're moving to those segments.
Okay, and one last thing, we added the feedback form to the agenda just to reinforce that it's very important to us that we do get your feedback. Okay, that's out of the way, let's get started. So Scott, with the growing trend on internet privacy concerns, the cookie's been getting some pretty negative press of late. And I suppose everyone joining today knows about third-party and first-party cookies, but we're going to cover both so that everyone's starting from the same place.
Right, and I think probably most websites today make an announcement when you land on their site that they use cookies. And I think the act of having to accept that they use cookies makes these first-party cookies seem more ominous than they actually are. So the legislation we're about to talk about has really sort of forced websites to create the type of, those pop-up ads that were so popular and annoying in the 90s. But in reality, first-party cookies probably aren't as menacing as a lot of people think. So we'll review why that is in just a second. And first-party cookies have been around for a very long time, at least digital marketing years. It's the third-party cookies that we're also going to talk about that appear to be going away, which is both a good thing for privacy-minded consumers and potentially bad for marketers. So we'll talk about all of that and recommend ways for marketers to make the most of it.
Okay, let's get into it. So for this slide called What is a Cookie, we thought it would be a great place to insert our first fun trivia question, which is, what is a cookie? And you can see that question on your screen, and we're going to give the summary of the anonymized responses as soon as everyone's answered. So which of the following best defines what an internet cookie is? Just choose what you think fits best. You can see they're coming in.
Right, they're all coming in. We've got about 53%, we're up to 59% now, 60%, 61. All right, we're gonna give you 3 more seconds. Get your answers in if you would, please. And again, it's anonymous, so. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and call it. All right, we've got, with 78% weighing in, we have got 55% said a small piece of text, 37% said a program, and 8% said a bot.
Okay, thanks everyone. And in fact, a cookie is just a small bit of information stored as text strings. So the website server sends you this text string and the browser writes it to your computer hard drive. Yeah,
so the thing is, cookies can be helpful when a website wants to cater the viewer's website experience based on their previous activity. So for instance, when you purchase something on Amazon, Amazon assigns an ID to you, storing your information with that ID in its database. Because the browser puts that ID on your hard drive, the website knows your preferences when you return at some point in the future. And it was designed to be helpful because the next time you go to Amazon, Amazon's server recognizes you and you might see a message like, hey, welcome back, Karen.
Yeah, and I don't mind that part. I think remembering who I am and knowing my preferences is a plus. And keeping the items in my shopping cart is great because, you know, I don't have to search for them again.
Right. So, well, Amazon wants to make the buying experience as simple as possible, obviously. And these types of first-party cookies are not likely to change, in all honesty. The first-party cookies that Amazon uses are meant to build a stronger relationship with the website visitors, while also making checkout easier. But the objectionable part starts with this part of the definition right here. You know, people just don't like the idea that cookies record their activity on the site. But it's actually the third-party cookies that most people actually find objectionable.
Yeah, we're going to get into that in a minute, but just so we're all working from the same definition and understanding of cookies, let's cover the basics first. So, are cookies harmful to my computer?
No. So they're nothing like programs. They're just text strings on your computer. They're very simple, and they're actually not very new either. They've been around since the mid-90s.
And can a company read our personal information from my hard disk with a cookie?
No. So only the cookie that's sent in the first place is returned to the server. And as I said, it's not a program or a bot.
Okay, so let's see what a cookie looks like.
Okay, well, if we were to go to Cookieless.com, the cookie file that might be placed on my machine might look like the following.
Not that it matters, but I think it makes sense to tell us what Quidgibo is. Again.
Right. So Quidgibo is a fictional word that I like to use for everything fictional because it's the final word that Bart Simpson played in the Scrabble game against his dad, Homer, to win the game. And he also said he should get 50 extra points for using all those letters.
Yeah, okay, that's good context. So let's look at a real example.
Okay, so Amazon.com has the browser place information on my machine so that they know who I am when I return to Amazon.com. That's really the entire reason that the cookie was created. Like I said, they wanted to be able to keep track of new and returning visitors. So when I look at the cookie file Amazon has created on my machine, which by the way, everyone can see on computers, it contains this line of script. So Amazon's cookie is a little longer than some, but again, it's just a string of text to identify who I am and what I'm interested in.
So what do all of those numbers represent?
Well, so it appears that Amazon stores a main user ID as well as an ID for each session and the time I started my session on the website. And you can see there's also something called an X main value. We don't really know what that is. But the majority of sites just store one piece of information, a unique user ID on your machine. But a site can store many name value pairs, just as many as they want.
And what are name value pairs?
Yeah, so a name value pair is just a named piece of data. But again, even though this is a long string, it's not a program. It doesn't actually do anything, like I said, except identify who you are to the website you're visiting. A website can only retrieve the information placed on your computer. It can't retrieve information from other cookie files placed, by other servers. It can't look for other information on your computer.
Okay, but if Amazon can see that file, what keeps it from seeing other files on my machine?
Well, you have to remember that Amazon is not actually communicating with you directly. You have to use a browser to reach Amazon's server, right? So if you typed in Amazon.com, the browser will contact Amazon.com with a request for Amazon's homepage. At the same time, the browser looks on your machine for a cookie file that Amazon has already sent. And only when it finds that file will it send the name value pairs in the file to Amazon's server. If it doesn't find an Amazon cookie file, it won't send any data.
And if there's not a name value pair there, then Amazon knows to treat me like a new prospect. And that will create a new ID for their database and send a new name value pair to my machine to start enabling them to track what I'm doing on this site.
Right. And your computer stores that cookie data on your hard drive, and it can change or add new pairs whenever you visit the site and request a page. And by the way, you can set an option in any browser to accept or deny requests to put cookies on your drive. You can actually see and block them all if you want. There's really nothing nefarious about it.
I think probably a lot of people like the option of being asked before placing cookies on their hard drives because more and more, I think people don't really care for the idea that a website they're visiting is actually storing something on their computers. It can seem sort of invasive, even if it is just a text string.
Yeah, well, again, there are first-party cookies, and they do help websites keep track of how many new and returning visitors they have to the site, which is probably why they were originally created. But They also add considerable convenience. But because the legislation like GDPR in Europe, which is meant to help protect people's privacy, we now are inundated with these ridiculous pop-ups where people are involuntarily, I mean, they are actually voluntarily agreeing to terms, honestly, that no one ever actually reads.
Yeah, it's not ideal. And we'll talk in a minute about how competition is helping this situation. But first, let's look at some examples of how first-party cookies work.
Right. Okay. So if you go to msn.com, that site enables you to change the content, layout, and color you prefer to see. And it allows you to do that without being logged in. You can see here, I'm not logged in. It also enables you to modify your default location.
And it's all managed by cookies without having to log in.
Exactly. In fact, here's the name value pair that gets added to the MSN cookie file on my computer. Since I live in Roswell, Georgia, it makes sense. It allows MSN to immediately put the temperature on the screen for where I live.
But that would mean that each website has to keep your individual information inside of cookies, which is what I thought we were moving away from.
Yeah, well, so most websites don't actually do it this way anymore. I mean, websites today really only need to have a cookie containing your unique ID stored on your computer. Then that site's database can store everything they need to know about you, such as pages you've viewed from the site and information you have already given to the site in online forms and that sort of thing.
Yeah, and their databases are particularly important for things like shopping carts.
Yes, and that's also why first-party cookies are particularly important. E-commerce sites can implement things like shopping carts and quick checkout options. The cookie really only needs to contain a unique ID, and that lets the site keep track of you as you add different things to your cart. Each item you add to your shopping cart is stored in the site's database rather than the cookie, usually. So when you check out, the site knows what's in your cart by retrieving all your selections from the database. So with that said, it wouldn't be possible to implement a convenient shopping mechanism without cookies or something like that.
Okay, so cookies or something like them appear to be necessary. What's the problem with cookies?
Well, again, there are first-party and third-party cookies. And honestly, the only real problem with first-party data is what the company does with the data it has on you.
What do you mean by that?
So let's say you visit usatoday.com every day, an online paper that isn't gated, right? So you visit their travel and their tech and their money pages. You click on several articles about Las Vegas, pleasure cruises in the travel section, and articles about cashing out your traditional investments. Well, and I'm not saying that USA Today does this, but they could potentially build a file in their database on your activity and have some knowledge of what your interests are.
But it's anonymous, right? The cookies on our computers aren't programs that can search out who we are and look into our records. I mean, all they might really know is my IP address.
Yeah, that's true. But let's say one day you decide that after months or years of viewing USA Today, you like their content enough to subscribe to their service. Well, in order to do that, you'll need to give them your name, email address, and whatever else it takes to open up an account with them. And now they can tie that IP address that's been coming to their site for a long time to an actual person, you.
And that will give them your personal data.
Yeah, it would. But where first-party cookies really have come under fire is when they sell those profiles to other companies or brokers of data. So that's actually outside of the scope of this webinar.
Yeah, but hang on a second. The credit card numbers used to subscribe obviously would be illegal to share or to sell. So you're saying they've got a lot of other information on you that's valuable to businesses?
Yeah, well, so in the example of USA Today, they'd have maybe months or years of data on what pages you surfed, what articles you've read, and what ads you've clicked. They may have a pretty good idea of your interests, and they could have built a profile of who you are and maybe what you're in market for. And more to the point, many large organizations that have so many data points on people can build algorithms. And here's the important part. That logic, building a profile on you, who you are, is actually now their proprietary information. They have a profile on you, and that profile of you is their property, not yours.
And that has a value to marketers and others who want to sell stuff to us.
Right. Now we're getting into how Google and Facebook do well. But as I said, that's really the only problem we see with first-party data. Again, first-party cookies aren't likely to go away. Whether that information be shared externally is more of a regulatory issue, which might be like HIPAA regulations or for health data. Our financial data can't be shared because of regulation. But these new customer profiles, which are based on that company's algorithms, are a new type of data altogether, and one that can be addressed through legislation, sort of like the way that health and financial data can't be shared today.
Okay, so first-party cookies aren't likely to go away because they're necessary for both the website visitor and publisher. And whether that data can be sold is a matter for legislators to take up. But the real issue is with third-party cookies. So let's talk about that.
So third-party cookies are brought to you by certain web browsers, such as Google Chrome. And it happens when your browser loads an advertisement, or a so-called targeting pixel, right? So you can see here that before you download the Chrome browser, they get you to acknowledge that they use cookies.
So it's not the same first-party cookie, but it collects the same information.
Well, the third-party cookie can actually read a lot more, as I'm sure a lot of people tuning in know, because it's not restricted to your movement on one single website. The third-party cookie puts little cookies on any website that uses the Google Ads network, so they know where you're going with third-party cookies.
They can follow you around the internet.
Exactly. And your behavior all around the web reveals a lot about your interest, as you can imagine, your consumer behavior. The behavior creates a user profile and enables targeted and personal advertising. And that's why marketers love it. Google can sell access to advertisers to customers they predict are what they call in-market or affinity for any company's particular products or services.
And by doing that, by building profiles of people, like we talked about, but they don't necessarily have your name and address and that sort of thing that the first-party databases might keep, right?
So they don't necessarily have your personal data unless you logged into your Google account, which I think most people stay logged into as a matter of convenience. And Bella is going to talk about that in a minute.
Okay, so I know a lot of people listening in know the difference between first and third-party cookies, but let's see a one-slide example of how that might work.
Yeah, so let's say you're in the market for a weighted vest, and you use Google Chrome to do a Google search to find that weighted vest. Then you click on this ad right here, and that brings you to this page. Well, this is Clutch Fitness's page, and they're going to load a first-party cookie to your machine. But Google Chrome is also tracking you with a third-party cookie.
So two different cookies tracking you.
Yeah, well, but Clutch Fitness is only tracking what you're doing on their site. For instance, if you went to their products page and saw an ab exercise roller that looked interesting, it would probably be smart for them to make note of it. But what if you open another new Chrome browser page and Googled fitness wheel?
Only the third-party cookie is tracking you at that point.
Right. So this ad takes you to Rogue Fitness, where Rogue Fitness will install a first-party cookie for the page where you landed, but only for their site. And maybe you click on it and add it to your shopping cart, because that way you can see shipping costs.
And meanwhile, Google is following you around the internet.
Right, but let's say you don't like the cost of shipping and you abandon the sale. At that point, you close both browsers. Well, if you go back to Rogue Fitness the next day or a week later or anytime really, they should remember who you are and still have that ad wheel in your shopping cart because of their first-party cookies.
But they'll only use those cookies when you return to the site.
Well, actually, once you've been to their site, Rogue could turn on retargeting using Google's display network to show you an ad at a later time when you're on different sites. But that's also a little outside of this webinar scope. But retargeting may be likely to go away in the future, at least without third-party cookies, we think.
Just so we're all clear, retargeting is what happens when you search for a product or service which leads you to a website. Then you look at the products or services on that site, then you leave the site, but hauntingly, you see ads for that website's products or services at a later time when you're on a different site. And that's retargeting.
Right. Anyway, getting back to the third-party cookies, because Google Chrome has used third-party cookies to follow where you've gone, other than the rogue site, Google also now probably categorizes you as someone who's probably what they call in market, as a prospect for exercise gear. And they may very well, likely, actually, include you in a bucket of people that they tell Dick's Sporting Goods about, and Hibbett Sports and Cabela's, that you're looking at sports-related equipment.
So you're likely to see ads from other sports stores as well. And this makes money for Google. So why did Google announce in 2020 that they were going to phase out third-party cookies by 2023?
Yeah, so my knowledge, Google hasn't actually said specifically why they're abandoning third-party cookies. But there are a couple of reasons that stand out to us, namely competition. So we're going to cover some of that in the next segment, where we'll show that consumers really don't like being tracked without their permission, which has opened the door for Apple and others to potentially win customers.
Okay, great. Bella, you ready to dive into this?
Oh yes, can't wait.
Okay. So the cookie, in air quotes that nobody can see right now, has gotten a pretty bad rap. But I think we've shown that the first-party cookies aren't necessarily bad. In fact, they're pretty helpful. But the third-party cookie appears to be the culprit because people don't want to be followed around the internet without their consent. So, Bella, what's up with that?
Right. While we'd argue that much of the early legislation was well intended, but not really all that protective of individual privacy. I mean, third-party cookies are still around, tracking you without your consent. And while Google Chrome will be moving away from third-party cookies, they're still in place today. Meanwhile, Safari and Firefox and some others don't track with third-party cookies at all.
Okay, let's get into it then.
So in 2018, the European Union passed the GDPR, or the General Data Protection Regulation, which really has put a spotlight on internet privacy.
I can remember in May 2018 receiving multiple emails from businesses and other organizations, like all at the same time, telling me that they'd updated their privacy policies and asking me to acknowledge it. And websites today also mention the caveat about cookies when you land there. But it didn't really make sense to many Americans why we had to comply with European regulation. I mean, this is Scott's favorite. If we're going to follow European laws, why can't it be Germany's lack of a speed limit on the Autobahn?
Well, there's a pretty big difference between individual countries' laws and a regulation covering all 28 countries in the EU. But because it's data that travels across the internet, the GDPR's provisions also require that any personal data exported outside of the EU is protected and regulated. In other words, if any European citizens' data is touched, you should be compliant. For example, if Delta Airlines is selling services to someone in Germany, although the airline is located in the US, they're still required to comply with GDPR. Anyway, irrespective of whether you sell anything to Europeans, the first state here in the US followed suit with a similar act when selling to that state's citizens. And we'd bet that everyone knows what that state is.
Yeah, we'd bet, because we asked this as a fun trivia question and 94% of people got it right. Anyway, California soon followed suit with their own law, the CCPA, which is pretty similar to the GDPR. But neither of these actually outlawed third-party cookies. So why do they matter for this webinar?
Well, like I mentioned, these two new laws really put a white-hot spotlight on internet privacy. And even before that, Google was feeling the pressure. Just before GDPR was enacted, Google announced it would stop mining what people were writing in Gmail in order to personalize ads, which people thought was pretty creepy anyways.
Yeah, you mean like if I email my mom and ask her for an apple pie recipe, and then I suddenly start seeing ads for Pillsbury's pie crust.
Right. That's very creepy. Gmail would sift through the content in emails and serve up ads to people based on what they'd written in their emails. And although no one at Google was actually reading the emails, the automated process of pulling out keywords felt very invasive. Anyway, privacy is pretty front and center now. So naturally, it's been argued that cross-site tracking infringes on a user's privacy because users don't have the ability to identify, understand, consent to, or control anything. More to the point, though, competitors of Google noticed this growing trend and appear to have taken advantage of it, and that's a good thing. Apple Safari was the first to take advantage of this new trend, instituting their ITP protocols. ITP stands for Intelligent Tracking Prevention. And in June 2018, Apple CEO Tim Cook announced at the Worldwide Developers Conference that, quote, privacy is a fundamental human right, when he announced the release of ITP 2.0. Safari browsers started blocking third-party cookies by default. So in Safari, when a user visits a website, the website still cookies the user to deliver a better user experience like we talked about.
But is retargeting possible in Safari? It seems like that's a first-party cookie, but used in a third-party context if the ad's following people around the internet.
Well, in Safari, and this was way before iOS 14.5, if the user hasn't visited the website again within a day, cookies can only be used in the first-party context. So in other words, if the cookies have had the ability to track the users across the web, it's disabled. So technically, retargeting could be done only for 24 hours within Safari. Also in Safari, if the user hasn't visited the website again in 30 days, the cookies will be purged permanently.
Now that's pretty serious. So you said Safari was the first, and Safari's moved to a cookieless world. Other browsers have taken similar steps.
Right. In September of 2019, Firefox released its enhanced tracking protection. I guess that could be called ETP. And a lesser known browser called Yandex announced more recently that it will limit third-party cookies with something they call your tracking protection.
That's YTP, and others are following suit. So it appears to have opened the door for competitors like lesser known Brave and Dolphin and Bromite to grab some market share from Chrome. But the obvious question is, will it work?
Well, we decided that the national poll that we held and reported in on a different webinar was perfect to answer that question. So apologies to the repeat webinar attendees who've already seen the two graphs we're about to go over.
And what webinar was that?
Is the webinar we gave on the duopoly alternatives, or officially I think it was called Marketing Alternatives to Google and Facebook. Anyway, we talked about this new trend of wanting more privacy, which is why organizations like DuckDuckGo search are really hoping to win market share on Google search because people just don't like being tracked across the internet.
Okay, well, it's certainly relevant here too. And as always, if anyone would like a recording of that webinar, just hit us up in the Q&A window or shoot us an email.
Anyway, we wanted to get a sense of how important privacy was to American internet users. So we held this national survey asking people to rate the importance of keeping their search engine queries private so that companies like Google didn't keep a profile on them, which they could then sell to advertisers. Right.
And considering that search engine history is used to cater more relevant ads to people, it might be surprising to some to learn that 75% of people said their search engine privacy was either important or extremely important. And that's those orange and blue guys on the screen right here.
And only 5% said it was either not really important or not important at all. Those were probably Google employees since it's such a big company. So that's search engine privacy. But we also wanted to look at browser privacy, like when Google Chrome uses third-party cookies to track what websites we view.
Okay, and this next graph is going to speak to people's opinions about tracking their browser history as opposed to search engine history. So it appears that even more people think that browser history should be private, with 83% or about 5 out of 6 people saying they thought it was either important or extremely important.
Yes, well, as we said in the other webinar on the duopoly alternatives, when you use Google search, you're essentially volunteering to tell Google your interests because you're asking Google search engine a question. I mean, if I'm Googling popular wedding dress designs, they might think I'm in the market for marriage-related items.
Bella, what are you trying to say?
Nothing, absolutely 100% hypothetical. But a really good example of how Google's logic works. They might then decide that I'm in the market for florists and jewelers and maybe caterers. But in that example, I'm willingly telling Google what I'm interested in. But if I use Google Chrome to browse around the internet and Google's building a profile of what I'm interested in by what websites I visit, that's a completely different thing altogether. I didn't give them permission to follow me around the internet, despite having accepted their cookie warning when I downloaded Google Chrome. I mean, that warning looks like every other warning I get when I go to a website that uses first-party cookies to track me. And that's what I think is reflected from this survey. More people are saying browser privacy is very important when compared to search history.
And if so many people appear to be concerned about their browsing history remaining private, it obviously raises the question of why Google Chrome and others would continue to track users' movements.
Well, again, Google announced that the Chrome browser will stop tracking third-party cookies at some point in 2023, which they recently moved back from their initial date of 2022. They appear to have a solution for tracking people without making that tracking personally identifiable, which we'll go over here in a minute. But Google's desire to continue making lots of money, which they can do by offering really targeted search engine advertising, isn't likely to go away. Their desire to make money is not likely to stop. And the more targeted their advertising is, the more valuable it is to advertisers. But Scott will cover that next.
Okay, and Bella, in another webinar we did earlier this year, we talked about how in 2016, Google made the decision to make all of our Google interactions personally identifiable, which was in contrast to what Sergey Brin, the founder, said in 2007. As I recall, after purchasing DoubleClick in 2007, he said that privacy would be the company's, quote, #1 priority. We don't really have time to go into all of that now, but Google's decision to drop its ban against personally identifiable web tracking meant that Google made the choice to reverse their founder's decision. Our actions in Gmail, Google Maps, and Google Search were all tied into the same Google account. So as long as you're logged into your Google account, Google knows what you're doing on many fronts.
Yep, and since 2016, Google's been building a profile on individual users, tracking their search activity, tracking their website activity, tracking the YouTube videos we watch. They're even tracking what stores we physically visited, tracking us through the location services used with Google Maps. And nobody outside of Google actually knows how they weave all of this information together to build a profile on us, but it appears to be working, and it's delivering really targeted information to advertisers, which has been great for marketers.
But that's changing, which is, of course, why we're all here today.
Right. Well, the reason they've announced that they'll stop third-party tracking is most likely due, at least in part, to the fact that their competitors are forcing their hands. In other words, they don't seem to really have a choice at this point. With this many people saying that internet privacy is important to them, other browsers are putting privacy protocols in place. So Google has to either change their model or lose market share in the search and browser space.
To competitors like Apple. And that leads us into the impact of the competition, which is the next segment, as you can see from the agenda footer at the bottom of your screen. And that will be followed by recommendations for weathering the storm that's about to hit marketers. Okay, we've talked about how people seem to have been concerned about their privacy and how Europe's GDPR and California's CCPA were enacted in an attempt to ensure that internet activity remains private. And we've dipped our toes, so to speak, into how competition is also aiding the privacy effort. But now we want to look at the actual impact that competition appears to be having. Privacy isn't always dictated very well by top-down governmental regulation. In fact, competition is arguably more likely to help ensure customers get what they want. And that may be why Apple has taken many steps with their Safari browser and iPhone updates to maximize the privacy that their customers have.
Right. Well, really quickly about Safari and iPhone. A lot of people don't realize this, but those two Apple products were released at the same time, the same day. The previous CEO of Apple, Steve Jobs, was really a true visionary. He used to tell his marketing team that he didn't need to have focus groups because he already knew what people wanted. Well, I just want to stick this photo in here because I remember Jobs was just really excited up there on the stage. He made this huge announcement that they were actually releasing 3 new products. He kept saying it over and over again as the icons, those 3 icons are swirling around the screen. He's like, today we're going to release a phone and an internet browser and an iPod, a phone, a browser. No, he kept saying it over.
And he could say that because they were all housed on the new iPhone.
Right, but isn't it fascinating? Steve Jobs, absolute visionary, was excited about announcing 3 new products. When you think about how many products your smartphone represents today, I mean, my phone is my GPS, it's my checkbook, it's my weather app. It can be a barometer, it can be a parent's glucose meter for a diabetic child or TV, you know, hundreds of things on my phone. I very much doubt even the late, great Steve Jobs knew just how much the smartphone was going to change our lives. The App Store didn't actually come out for more than a year later. And that's when, of course, they had the idea to push their API out to others who could start building apps for the iPhone. And that was, I would argue, even a bigger development than the iPhone itself, because it led to millions of products rather than 3. And they hadn't actually thought about that when they rolled out the first iPhone.
Very true. But let's bring it back home. I think the major point here is that the Safari browser came out the same year as the iPhone, 2007, which is relevant because Google's Chrome browser came out the following year in 2008.
Yeah, and that's important because today Google Chrome has higher market share than Apple Safari, which is what we're going to look at next. And Mozilla's Firefox was released in 2002, and the Internet Explorer came out in '95.
And Firefox followed that suit, but Google Chrome has continued tracking with third-party cookies. So let's take a look at what the market share looks like in the browser space. And there may be a handful of people joining today that have already seen this chart because we used it in the alternative media webinar, but it's really suitable for today's content on competition.
Yeah, well, this is kind of a cool chart anyway, Danny. I love to see it every time.
So along the x-axis are the years that the browser's market share was tracked. And of course, the y-axis represents the percent of the market share that browsers have in that year. So for instance, the browser with the most market share at about 60% in 2009 is the one in light blue at the top. And despite that, a handful of people already may know the answer to this question. We thought it would be a good place for our second trivia question.
Yeah, so the question here is represented by the light blue point, like we said, which is sitting at about 6% of the market share for all browser use in the US. Is it Chrome, Safari, Internet Explorer, or Firefox? And the question should be on your screen, so we'll just give you a few seconds to respond to that. You know, it's interesting. Most people are getting this right. We got about 59% weighing in so far. We'll just give another 3 or 4 seconds. All right, we got 2/3 of the people weighing in. 2 more seconds. Okay, I'm gonna call it. 15% said they thought it was Firefox, 6% said they thought it was Safari, 17% thought it was Chrome, and 60, well, let's change, somebody came in last second. 60% said the right answer, Internet Explorer. Thank you.
Yep. And in 2009, the browser with the greatest market share, as some remembered, was in fact Internet Explorer. And at the bottom of the pile was Google Chrome.
Yeah, but now let's take a look at how their market share changed over the years. But we're going to pause it. We're going to pause this graph in 2016.
Okay, so Chrome went way up and Internet Explorer went way down. But what happened in 2016?
Well, we mentioned earlier that that's the year that Google sort of silently removed their ban of personally identifiable web tracking. That's in 2016, which happens to be the year after Tim Cook said that privacy is a human right.
So Google was tracking more and Apple went the other way. They were limiting tracking.
Right. And again, Google was actually building personal profiles on people, connecting their names and email accounts with where they visited on the internet, to where they had physically been, according to Google Maps and Waze. Not to mention people's search engine queries. All of that was tied together.
So you think that may have had an effect, which we're about to see?
Well, I mean, we can't be certain, obviously, but a year later, in 2017, Apple instituted its ITP protocols, which was the first serious initiative to limit tracking. It's also the year that DuckDuckGo, the search engine that's really keen on privacy, became really popular, partnering with Yahoo and Wikipedia and others.
Okay, let's see what happened. So for the first time since Google Chrome was released, they lost market share and Safari continued to grow.
And that is why I personally think Apple's CEO, who earlier this year was publicly arguing online with Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg, not a private phone call, but online, may have more room to grow.
Yeah, they were arguing because by blocking Facebook's tracking mechanism, Facebook's going to have a really difficult time providing really targeted advertising. And I think that's probably a pretty good segue to move to our segment on how Facebook and Google have responded. And now we're really getting into the thick of it. And situation's a bit sus. The legislation and regulation that we mentioned earlier filled our screens with pop-ups that require us to agree to they're using first-party cookies to track our activity on their sites. And I think we've seen that these first-party cookies aren't actually harmful to us. In fact, they're helpful in most cases. But the third-party cookies have been in effect all this time, and those are the cookies we seem to feel are the really invasive ones to our privacy.
Well, not to worry. Natural competition is helping. Apple saw that Google and Facebook were making lots of money by using people's personal private information, which consumers were not happy about. So Apple realized that protecting their privacy was an easy way to please consumers and likely gain market share as a result. Apple's Safari browser was already hindering third-party cookies, but Apple's iOS 14.5 release took smartphone privacy to a new level, as we've mentioned.
And that puts Facebook, Google, and others in a bit of a bind. So let's take a look at how the duopoly responded.
So it's important to note that Facebook, like most platforms, including Snapchat and TikTok and others, use IDFAs, which is short for identifiers for advertisers. And these are unique identifiers for mobile devices and are used to target and measure advertising effectiveness. So the IDFA allows Facebook and others to track people similar to Google's third-party cookies.
And another thing that most people don't realize is that a large majority of Facebook users access Facebook from their phones as opposed to their desktops.
Yeah, that's right. So eMarketer reported in 2020 that there were 168 million Americans who access Facebook through their phones, while there are only 54 million Americans who access Facebook through their computers. And there's some overlap there, but Facebook is being accessed more than 3 times as much on the phone as it is on the laptop or the desktop.
So the fact that Apple iPhone has 46% of the smartphone market share and seems very much in the camp that privacy is a human right will definitely impact how much data Facebook can gather from the users of Facebook.
Yeah, well, a lot of industry analysts believe it's going to have a massive impact on Facebook's ability to offer really targeted advertising. But let's be honest, targeting like this has made marketing much more cost efficient. And that's a concern for most marketers. We've been thinking about this for a while, and we're going to provide suggestions for what to do at the end of the webinar.
But Apple has made it possible for years for people to opt out of targeting and tracking, right?
Yeah, well, with their limited ad tracking, it's been sort of buried in the settings of Apple's iOS. But with the release of iOS 14.5 just a few weeks ago, they're now prompted when they download an app to opt out right there in the download stage, or to be more clear, they're actually having to opt in to allow themselves to be tracked.
And that's important because although a majority of people said they don't want to be tracked, as the survey showed, a majority of people also haven't taken the time to opt out in their phone settings.
Exactly. And this is obviously a very new app, but some analysts have projected that, the 30% who opted out previously is likely to jump to somewhere around 90% because of having to opt in to allow them to track you. And that's a massive drop in Facebook's ability to gather that important information that they need in order to sell really targeted advertising opportunities.
It's kind of a big deal.
It is. Apple actually delayed the release of their new iOS from September of last year to this year, so the companies relying on ad tracking could prepare for it. But when Apple made their announcement about blocking IDFAs, Facebook actually took out full-page newspaper ads, among other things, claiming that Apple's new privacy tactics would hurt small businesses, which wasn't necessarily wrong. They've been really quite vocal about how this will hurt small businesses' ability to have cost-effective targeted advertising.
So we talked about the pressure Google has been under to do away with third-party cookies, and we're going to explain how that's going to work next. But first, this is where you inserted your 90-second commercial break about responsible and digital. So let's go.
Right. Yeah, so actually, I don't think I need a full 90 seconds, but I'm just going to mention an offer that we have for everyone tuning in. And really, most of what we've talked about today, it leads up to that offer. Because with cookies being blocked by Safari and Firefox and others, and IDFAs now blocked by iPhone, and cookies eventually going away in 2023, everything's changing pretty rapidly. So in the next segment, Bella's actually going to talk about what Google says they're going to do to still be able to give targeted advertising. But a lot of analysts seem to believe that Facebook and other social media platforms are really going to have a much more difficult time offering that really targeted advertising. So I'm just going to mention something, a way that we think is a really, really good way to get precision targeting without having to count on Facebook or any platform searches or history or browsing history, algorithms, that sort of thing. And the best way to combat the loss of these tracking mechanisms is to do your own research. And we can do that for the various bands of ideal prospects for your business. So we'll tell you all about them. That's what this audience segmentation and insights is really all about. We do the research and the analysis of the data, and we pull it on your prospects so you can know what your prospects look like, what messaging resonates with them, and how to best target them digitally. And it's as simple as let me know if you're interested in learning more. So you should have an email from me, Scott Lawrence, in your inbox. There's a link in that email that you can book time on the calendar if you want to, or you let the team know right now by answering the poll question that's about to be put on your screen. And that is the commercial. Thanks.
That was good. Nice and fast, Scott. Thank you so much. And we'll leave that up for a while. But next, Bella is going to talk about what Google is planning to do with without third-party cookies, as well as what Google has told us are going to be key strategies moving forward. But if you just indicate your interest level in taking us up on this offer, we'd appreciate it. There's also a second question, sort of a catch-all in case you'd like to learn more about getting help with SEO, paid search, paid social, those kinds of things. And as I said, we'll leave that poll up for a minute, but if we're going to finish by the top of the hour, we'll need to carry on. But I do want to thank everyone for responding. We really appreciate it. So, Bella, it seems like Google's decision to end third-party tracking is a really big deal because they make a lot of money selling advertising based on what they know of users' browsing activity. So how will they be able to survive without tracking people across the internet?
Well, they're still going to track us, just in a slightly different way. I mean, half of Google's revenues come from ads, according to their latest quarterly report, and they're not going to simply jeopardize that revenue stream. I'll get into that in a second, but first, remember just very quickly how third-party cookies work. Every time we visit a website that uses the Google Ads network, the website deposits a little cookie for Google. So Google can track your browsing history, your interests, and how long you spent on the website and much more.
Okay, got it. But that's going to stop because third-party cookies are going away. So how will they continue to track us?
Well, we've already talked about how first-party cookies aren't so bad, right? Well, Google, as the publisher of properties like Google Search, Google Docs, YouTube, Chrome, and others, considers its own user login data to be its first-party data. So if you use Google services, you're still tracked using their first-party cookies. And without third-party cookies, they may not know some specifics of what you did on certain sites. But let's face it, Google knows what a website is all about. I mean, websites want to be found in search results, and businesses willingly submit their data to Google. Businesses want Google to crawl their websites. So using Google Chrome, profiles will still be built on people, just not using third-party cookies.
So it sounds like it's nearly identical to their third-party cookie data.
It's close, but it's not quite as accurate as third-party cookie data because they're now going to group people into what they call cohorts through their new flock program.
Flock, like flock of seagulls?
Well, we think Google may have been trying to find an acronym that underscored how they're now grouping people as opposed to keeping individual records on them. In other words, you're right, it's like a flock of, a flock is a group of birds, but their new program is actually spelled FLOC. And again, it stands for Federated Learning of Cohorts.
Ah, okay, so tell us how it works.
Well, like I said, Google wants to know what websites are all about. And if you use Chrome, specifically, they know what sites you've visited. So to use an extremely simple example, if you visit a website that sells cars, chances are you're in the market to buy a car, right? Well, cohorts are just a way of bucketing people into different groups. So the more websites you visit, the more buckets you'll belong to. And it's basically the same technology as before, but using buckets of people rather than individual profiles of people.
And there's probably no telling how many buckets Google will have or how many buckets a person's going to go into. But it seems like they're still collecting your personal browsing information in order to add you to a bucket. And they're still going to place a cookie on your hard drive, albeit a first-party cookie now.
Right, but Google has said that they're going to anonymize everything and encrypt it before sending it to the buckets on Google's servers. So personal browsing history should not be personally identifiable. And as to how many buckets there are, that's going to be Google's proprietary secret sauce. It could be that they'll bucket people who look up recipes twice or more a week and also visit websites like Crate and Barrel because they have data that shows those two groups are similar. No one knows exactly how they'll build out the buckets, but they could also, combine various buckets to make even larger cohort groups.
And so by anonymizing, encrypting, and bucketing people, they get away from the need for third-party cookies, but they can still make money by offering buckets of people to interested advertisers.
Right, but that doesn't mean that Google's getting out of the personal identification business. When you're logged into your Google account, they still know who you are. And if you keep your location services on your phone, they know where you've been. None of that requires third-party cookies, and it's all personally identifiable.
So Google may not really be worse off using this flock model, it sounds like.
Well, the anonymous grouping of people into buckets may interrupt retargeting that we talked about previously. Google seems to be looking for a solution to that, but it's always been true that you need third-party cookies for retargeting. But in other ways, Google may actually be better off. Before this, third-party cookies were used by a wide variety of ad networks, including Facebook and some others, but Facebook and other smaller ad networks do not own a browser. And that would seem to indicate that these other ad networks could lose market share to Google.
Yeah, it sounds like one of the losers here could be the marketers who've become accustomed to having very detailed targeting through third-party cookies. So let's talk about what marketers can do to alleviate what might seem like the headaches coming from all of this. I think Scott has a list of takeaways from what we know today.
All right, we're gonna have to make this quick because we're coming up on the top of the hour. Okay, so because independent research is just, I'm not even gonna talk about the first one very much. It's essentially what the commercial was all about. But those who have tuned into our YouTube and Facebook webinar best practices probably realize that the research we did at the beginning of that actually gives you richer data than you can have gotten from Facebook. Anyway, that'll be more and more true as time stretches on. Anyway, moving to the second point, since third-party cookies are going away, your first-party data is going to be really important moving forward. And if you don't have a CRM yet, it's past time, I think, to get one and feel comfortable with it. And we know it, everyone immediately thinks of Salesforce and tells how Salesforce is kind of a pain to use and it's expensive. And I get that, but there are other much easier and less expensive CRMs out there. And with those CRMs, you can track who's coming to your website by IP address. And your best prospects will want to come to your website when you have lots and lots of meaningful content for them. You know, content's going to be absolutely key in the future, starting right now. And offering free information to your best prospects will also be key. You know, it could be white papers, surveys, case studies, or really anything that your prospects are interested in. And that generally starts with three categories. What their competitors are doing, you're telling them what their competitors are doing, you're telling them what their customers are saying or what they're doing, or what's changing in the business landscape or the software landscape. Kind of like we're talking about for free today about how cookies are going away and why. And when you have really good content that people want to tune in for, you just gate it behind a form and collect their email addresses so you can invite them to come back for more and more meaningful content. Hopefully they begin to believe you and believe that you know what you're talking about. So when you do that, you can also build these lists as customized audiences and lookalike audiences in Facebook and Google. You don't want to talk much about this in this webinar, but aside from collecting emails, when people come to your website, Google Analytics can translate their UTM codes and build audiences similar to those people who've come to your website and taken particular behaviors. In other words, you can ask Google and Bing actually now, as of this year, to mimic the audiences of people who have downloaded a white paper, for instance, or filled out a form and gone 10 pages deep in your website. So you'll be able to build audiences for people who have similar traits to those people who are interested in your website and particular parts of your website. And with that said, Facebook and other social media platforms may have a relatively short window in their ability to offer quality lookalike audiences, unless they figure out how to circumvent Apple's new ATT policy.
Yeah, I believe, Scott, we heard that one strategy Facebook was considering was offering incentive to Facebook users to opt into tracking.
Yeah, right. Well, good luck with that, Facebook. But as we've covered, Google saw this coming and has sort of a backup plan with their FLOC program. And our paid search gurus at RMD stay pretty close to our Google reps, like on a weekly basis. So they've also offered several suggestions to help attribute conversions, because measurement is everything in this business. So Google said that the use of machine learning is to quantify the impact of marketing is really going to play a much larger role now. And the next important step is to ensure you have global site tags set up. And of course, global site tags are provided by Google Analytics, and it's important. In fact, we think it's one of the more crucial things to make sure you do right now.
Scott, tracking and tagging can get pretty complicated, right? And global site tags can be a cumbersome job, especially for larger sites if you're not used to it.
Yeah, and we suggest that everyone finds someone who's done it before to help you. Not everyone realizes that the UTM codes will allow you to build a list of website visitors without having to collect email addresses. And I don't think anyone really understands how long Google will be able to provide this service or retargeting. So the sooner it's set up, the better.
Yeah, I guess the point I was trying to drive to is that everyone could probably contact us because we could help them set that up.
Yeah, sure. I also wanted to mention something Apple rolled out in 2018, but it's becoming popular right now. And that's the what they call this. They called it SCAN, 3 years ago, but it's being called SCAD networks now, and that should be installed. Also, upgrade to the latest Google Analytics version for Firebase. It'll automatically register you for the SCAN attribution, and you can see SCAN conversions in Google Analytics today, and it should be available in Google Ads in the pretty near future.
Okay, Scott, so let's say they've got their tracking set up correctly, then what?
Well, when tracking set up, Google suggests using automated TCPI and TCPA bidding. Our guys would recommend multiple strategies, not just automated, but if you're going for the easy path, so long as tracking and tagging is set up appropriately, you can automate your bidding. And by the way, we have an email dedicated to the most Google search practices in 2021. that is chock full of automated bidding strategies. I think I said an email, I meant a webinar. So check that out if you haven't seen it. And like I said, if anyone needs help figuring that out, they can just send me an email and we'll talk through it. But everyone should probably do something soon, I think.
Okay, Scott, and that leads us to the last slide with your contact information. But everyone should also see the feedback form on your screen. We'd really appreciate it if you could fill that out. Thank you for sticking with us. I see we've run 4 minutes over today, but the feedback form is really super important to us. And as Scott said, I think he's got an email out to everyone. If you're interested in asking him questions directly, you can see his phone number right here.
Right. And I've also sent an email, or we had an email sent out. So you can respond to that if you like. Or just contact me. Okay.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much to everybody for joining us today. And again, apologies for taking up an extra 5 minutes of your time, but we really think it's worth it. The information here is something that's really useful to you. So everyone have a great rest of your week. And thanks again for joining us.
See you next time.
Bye.